6:43 a.m. The question came from across the street. Daniel Mercer was still standing in his driveway in worn work boots, holding a trash bag that smelled faintly of last night's takeout. His neighbor Greg leaned over the low wooden fence and called out casually, "Daniel, quick question." Daniel turned. Greg scratched the side of his beard and pointed down the street. "Why does your wife get picked up every morning by that black SUV?" Daniel did not answer, because Daniel had never seen a black SUV outside his house. The early morning air felt suddenly colder. Daniel followed Greg's finger. The vehicle sat 20 yards away along the curb. Large, black, too clean for their quiet Maryland street where most cars carried pollen dust and small scratches from grocery carts. The engine was running. Daniel could hear it now, low, smooth, expensive. His brain moved slowly through the possibilities. Wrong house, Uber, neighbor, anything except the one thing Greg had just said. Greg laughed awkwardly. "Nice ride, though." Daniel walked toward the street. Each step felt heavier than it should have. When he reached the curb, he saw the tinted rear window shift slightly. Movement inside. Then the rear door opened. Emily stepped out. Daniel felt something drop through his chest. Emily Mercer. His wife. Her dark hair pulled into the loose morning bun she wore when she rushed to work. The beige coat she had bought last fall hanging neatly around her shoulders. She looked exactly the same as every other morning. Except she was stepping out of a vehicle Daniel had never seen before. Emily turned toward the house. Then she saw him standing by the curb. For a moment the world stopped. No traffic, no birds. Just the quiet hum of the SUV engine and the two of them staring at each other from across the driveway. Daniel noticed the smallest things first, the way Emily's posture stiffened, the way her hand tightened around the strap of her work bag. Inside the vehicle, a man leaned forward slightly. Daniel could not see his face. Just a glimpse of a gray suit sleeve and a watch that flashed briefly in the sunlight. Emily said something quickly through the open door. Her voice was too quiet to hear. The man nodded. The door closed. The SUV rolled away down the street without hesitation. Daniel watched it disappear past the corner. Behind him, Greg whistled softly. Corporate life, huh? Daniel did not turn around, because the embarrassment had already started spreading through his chest like heat. How many times had that car been here? How many mornings had the neighbors seen it? How many people on this quiet street had watched his wife step into someone else's car while Daniel was still asleep inside the house? Emily walked up the driveway slowly. She stopped a few feet away from him. Daniel noticed the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne drifting from her coat. Something sharp, professional, not his. Emily spoke first. Her voice sounded careful. "You are home early." Daniel stared at her. "I work mornings." Emily blinked. "Right." Daniel glanced down the street again, even though the SUV was already gone. "Who drove you here?" Emily shifted her weight. "Just someone from work." Daniel waited. The silence stretched long enough that Emily finally looked away. Someone from work drives a car like that. Emily exhaled slowly. "Daniel, you are making this bigger than it is." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. The sky above the neighborhood was turning pale blue as the sun rose. Garbage trucks rumbled somewhere 2 blocks away. Normal morning sounds. But something had changed. Daniel asked quietly, "How long?" Emily frowned. "How long what?" Daniel looked at her again. "How long has that car been picking you up?" Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. And in that small hesitation, Daniel felt a cold realization move through his stomach. Whatever answer she gave next, it would not be the first lie. Emily did not answer the question. Not right away. The silence stretched between them in the driveway while the rest of the street slowly woke up. A garage door opened 2 houses down. Someone started a lawnmower even though it was barely past 7. Normal sounds. But Daniel could still hear the quiet echo of the SUV engine in his head. Emily finally walked past him toward the front door. It was just a ride. Daniel followed her inside. The house smelled like coffee and toasted bread from earlier that morning. The kitchen light was still on. Emily set her bag on the counter and began moving around the kitchen the way she always did when she wanted a conversation to end. She opened the refrigerator, took out oat milk, poured it into a glass. Her hands were steady. Too steady. Daniel leaned against the doorway. You did not answer the question. Emily took a sip before speaking. Which one? Daniel stared at her. How long? Emily wiped a drop of milk from the side of the glass with her thumb. Not long. Daniel waited. She did not add anything else. Daniel let out a short breath through his nose. That answer meant nothing. He stepped closer into the kitchen. The sunlight through the window caught the edge of Emily's coat. Daniel noticed again the faint scent of cologne mixed with her perfume. He had never worn cologne. Warehouse work did not mix well with expensive scents. Someone from work. Emily nodded quickly. Yes. Daniel studied her face. 12 years together had taught him the small signals. The way her jaw tightened when she was thinking too fast. The way her eyes avoided his when the truth was inconvenient. Right now, she was doing both. What is his name? Emily looked at him again. Jonathan. The name landed quietly in the room. Daniel tried to picture the man inside the SUV. Gray suit sleeve, expensive watch. Jonathan what? Emily hesitated again. Just Jonathan. Daniel almost laughed. Just Jonathan. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. Emily watched him carefully. Daniel ran both hands over his face. A strange feeling had started building in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to embarrassment. The kind that creeps in when you realize other people might know something about your life that you do not. Daniel spoke without looking up. Greg across the street asked me about the car. Emily froze. Daniel continued. He said it comes every morning. Emily said nothing. Daniel lifted his head slowly. Every morning. Emily stared at the counter. I did not think anyone noticed. Daniel leaned back in the chair. That sentence hurt more than he expected. You did not think your husband would notice. Emily's voice came out quickly. That is not what I meant. Daniel gestured towards the street outside. Apparently, the neighbors noticed. Emily rubbed her temples with both hands. Daniel, this is not a big deal. Daniel felt something shift inside him. It might not be a big deal to you. Emily looked up. What is that supposed to mean? Daniel stared at her for several seconds. Then he asked quietly, Did you tell him about me? Emily frowned. What? Daniel's voice stayed calm. The guy in the car, Jonathan. Does he know you are married? Emily's expression changed in a way Daniel could not immediately read, confusion, or guilt, or both. She answered carefully. Of course he does. Daniel nodded slowly. Then why does he send a car to pick up my wife every morning? Emily did not answer. Outside the kitchen window, a delivery truck rolled down the street. Daniel watched it pass. And suddenly, a small uncomfortable thought pushed into his mind. If the neighbors had already noticed the SUV, then this had not started yesterday, which meant something else had been happening for a while. Something Daniel had completely missed. Daniel tried to work, but the morning stayed inside his head like a piece of metal he could not remove. The warehouse floor was loud as usual. forklifts backing up, pallets hitting concrete, radios playing old rock music from somewhere near the loading docks. Normally, Daniel liked the noise. It kept his brain quiet. Today, it did not help. Every time he closed his eyes for even a second, he saw the same image. The black SUV, the door opening, Emily stepping out. Marcus from shipping nudged him with his elbow while they stacked boxes onto a pallet. "You look like you slept in a ditch." Daniel forced a small smile. "Something like that." Marcus laughed and walked off. Daniel checked the time on the wall clock. 12:48, Emily should be at her office by now. That thought sat strangely in his head, because for the first time Daniel realized he did not actually know where Emily was during most of her workday. He had always assumed. Office, meetings, coffee breaks, normal life. Now, that assumption felt thin. Daniel pulled his phone out of his pocket. He stared at Emily's contact for a few seconds. Then he locked the screen again. Calling her would not change anything. She would give the same calm answers. Someone from work, just a ride, nothing to worry about. Daniel tossed another box onto the pallet harder than he meant to. The cardboard cracked against the stack. Across the warehouse, a supervisor shouted for someone to slow down. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. The embarrassment returned again. Greg had known about the SUV. That meant other people on the street probably knew too. Neighbors watched everything. They always did. Someone walking a dog, someone watering a lawn, someone drinking coffee by the window. Daniel imagined the quiet conversations. "Did you see that car again this morning?" "Yeah, the same one." "Picks up his wife every day." Daniel's jaw tightened. He hated the picture forming in his mind. The guy who does not know what is happening in his own driveway. Daniel stepped away from the pallet and walked toward the break room. The vending machine hummed loudly against the wall. He bought a bottle of water and sat at the small plastic table. For a moment, he considered the possibility that none of this meant anything. Maybe the car really was just work. Maybe Emily had simply forgotten to explain, but another memory slid into place. 2 weeks ago, Emily had come home late, almost 10 at night. She said traffic was terrible near the office. Daniel remembered something else now. She had smelled different that night too, not perfume, cologne, the same sharp scent he noticed this morning. Daniel leaned back in the chair. The ceiling lights buzzed softly above him. A quiet realization moved slowly through his chest. If the car came every morning, then Emily had been stepping into someone else's world long before Daniel noticed. And the worst part was not the car. The worst part was how easily it had happened without him seeing it. Daniel looked down at his phone again. This time he opened their joint bank account, scrolling through the recent charges. Most of them were ordinary. Groceries, gas, utilities, then one payment stopped his thumb. Riverside Terrace, $184. Friday night. Daniel stared at the screen. Last Friday, Emily told him she worked late. Daniel felt the same cold weight settle in his stomach again. Late work. Or dinner with someone who owned a black SUV. Daniel woke up before the alarm. The room was still dark. The clock on the nightstand showed 6:41 a.m. Emily was already out of bed. He could hear the faint sound of the bathroom cabinet closing down the hall. Daniel lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Yesterday had not left his mind for even a minute. The charge from the restaurant. The SUV. Greg's casual question. Why does your wife get picked up every morning by that black SUV? Daniel sat up slowly. He walked to the bedroom window and looked out through the blinds. The street was quiet. For a second, he wondered if the car would not come today. Maybe yesterday had been a coincidence. Maybe Greg exaggerated. Then the vehicle turned the corner. The black SUV rolled down the street like it belonged there. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The engine stayed running as it stopped in front of the house. Same position, same place along the curb. Daniel checked the time again. 6:43, exact. Downstairs, he heard Emily walking through the kitchen. Cabinet doors, the soft clink of a mug. Normal morning sounds. Daniel walked down the hallway and stopped near the top of the stairs. Emily stood by the counter wearing the same beige coat from yesterday. Her hair was tied back neatly. She looked composed, like someone heading to a meeting. Daniel said nothing. He watched her through the railing. Emily grabbed her bag. Then she paused. For a moment, she looked toward the front window. The SUV was visible from there. Daniel wondered what she felt when she saw it. Excitement, nervousness, relief. Emily took a breath and walked toward the door. Daniel followed her quietly down the stairs. She opened the front door and stepped outside. Daniel stayed just inside the hallway. Through the glass panel, he watched. The SUV driver stepped out immediately. Tall, gray suit, professional posture. The man walked around the vehicle and opened the rear door. Not like a friend giving someone a ride, like a chauffeur. Emily smiled politely and stepped toward the car. Across the street, Greg was watering his lawn again. He paused, watching. Another neighbor slowed while jogging past the house. Two people now looking at the same scene. Daniel felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. This was not private anymore. Emily reached the open door. The driver held it while she stepped inside. Daniel noticed something else this time. Someone was already sitting in the back seat. A man. Daniel could only see part of him through the tinted window. Dark suit, white shirt, broad shoulders. The man leaned slightly toward Emily as she sat down. The driver closed the door. Daniel stepped out onto the porch before he could stop himself. The driver glanced at him briefly. Professional expression. Polite, but distant. Like Daniel was not important enough to matter. The SUV pulled away from the curb smoothly. Greg called out again from across the street. "Big job your wife has now, huh?" Daniel forced a tight smile. Something like that. Greg chuckled and turned back to his lawn. Daniel stood alone on the porch watching the car disappear down the street. For the first time, the humiliation hit fully. Not because of what Emily might be doing, but because the entire neighborhood had been watching it happen. Every morning, right in front of his house. And Daniel had been the only person who did not know. Daniel kept thinking about the man in the back seat. Not the driver, the other one. The one sitting beside Emily. That detail stayed with him the entire day. At work, Daniel moved boxes without really seeing them. The warehouse noise felt distant, like someone turned the volume down on the world. Around 3 in the afternoon, he stepped into the break room again. The same plastic tables. The same humming vending machine. Daniel sat down and pulled out his phone. For a few seconds, he stared at the bank app icon. Then he opened it. The Riverside Terrace charge was still there. $184. Friday night. Daniel tapped the transaction. Nothing new appeared except the timestamp. At 8:12 p.m. Daniel leaned back in the chair. Last Friday, Emily had walked through the front door at 9:30. She said traffic near the office had been terrible. Daniel remembered the moment clearly now. She had dropped her bag by the couch and complained about how exhausting the day had been. At the time, Daniel had nodded and kept watching television. Now, the memory felt different. Daniel opened the credit card history again. He scrolled slowly. Most of the charges were normal. Gas station, grocery store, a pharmacy near their house. Then another receipt appeared further down the list: city parking garage, downtown Baltimore, Thursday afternoon. Daniel frowned. Emily's office was in a completely different area. She usually parked in the company garage that her firm paid for. Daniel tapped the charge. The amount was small, but the location sat directly beside the same restaurant, Riverside Terrace. Daniel felt a tightness return to his chest. One dinner could be explained. 2 visits in the same week could not. Daniel locked the phone and sat quietly for a moment. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe the meeting really was work. Maybe the man in the SUV was a client. But another thought pushed in. Clients did not send drivers to pick someone up from their house every morning. Daniel ran both hands through his hair. The room felt warmer than before. Finally, he opened his phone again. This time he typed a name into the search bar. Jonathan. He stopped. Emily had only said the first name. Just Jonathan. Daniel stared at the blank search screen. A strange realization formed slowly. He did not know who this man was. He did not know where Emily had been eating dinner. He did not even know where she was parking her car during the day. 12 years of marriage. And suddenly Daniel realized how many pieces of her life he had never questioned. Daniel looked down at the Riverside Terrace receipt again. Then he made a decision. Tomorrow morning he would not go to work. Tomorrow morning he would follow the black SUV. And for the first time in 2 days, Daniel felt something close to certainty. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just a ride to work. Daniel did not go to work. He woke up before the alarm again, sometime around 6. The sky outside the bedroom window was still gray. Early morning light barely touching the roofs across the street. Emily was already awake. He heard her moving downstairs. Cabinets opening. The quiet hum of the coffee machine. Normal sounds. Daniel dressed slowly. Jeans. A faded hoodie. Nothing that would draw attention if someone looked too closely. When he stepped into the hallway, he paused at the top of the stairs. Emily stood in the kitchen near the counter. She looked almost exactly the same as the past 2 mornings. Beige coat, hair tied back, work bag resting beside her coffee mug. Daniel watched her for a moment. There was something calm about her movements, like someone who had already decided how the day would go. She finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, then picked up her bag. Daniel stepped down the stairs. Emily glanced up. "You are not leaving yet." Daniel shook his head. "Starting later today." Emily nodded once. She did not ask anything else. That small lack of curiosity bothered Daniel more than he expected. Emily walked toward the door. Daniel followed behind her. When she opened the front door, the morning air rushed into the hallway. The black SUV was already there. Engine running. 6:43 exactly. Emily stepped outside. Daniel remained just inside the doorway, standing where he could see everything through the glass. The driver got out immediately. Same tall man in the gray suit. He walked around the vehicle and opened the rear door. Emily approached the car. But this time Daniel saw the man in the back seat clearly. The window was down slightly, enough to reveal part of his face. Mid-40s, clean haircut. Expensive sunglasses resting on the front of his shirt. He looked relaxed, like someone who had done this routine many times. Emily leaned down slightly as she stepped into the car. The man said something. Daniel could not hear the words. But Emily laughed. It was a quick laugh, natural. Not the polite laugh she used with strangers. The driver closed the door. The SUV began pulling away from the curb. Daniel stepped outside suddenly. The driver glanced at him again in the rearview mirror. Just for a moment, the look was not hostile. It was something worse, dismissive, like Daniel was background noise. The car turned the corner and disappeared. Daniel stood in the quiet street. Across the road, Greg was already outside again, holding a mug of coffee. Greg gave a small nod toward where the SUV had gone. Busy schedule she has. Daniel forced a tight smile. Something like that. Greg shrugged and stepped back toward his porch. Daniel walked back inside the house. The silence inside felt heavy. For a moment, he stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Emily had been sitting minutes earlier. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered in the air. Daniel grabbed his car keys from the counter. Today, he was not going to the warehouse. Today, he was going to follow that black SUV. He stepped outside and got into his car. The engine started with a rough sound compared to the quiet luxury engine he had heard moments earlier. Daniel backed out of the driveway. Then he turned down the street in the same direction the SUV had gone. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Whatever he found this morning. At least it would be the truth, and right now the truth felt less painful than not knowing. Daniel spotted the SUV 2 intersections away. The black vehicle was easy to recognize even in morning traffic. It moved through the quiet streets with the smooth confidence of something built for a different world than the one Daniel lived in. Daniel stayed 3 cars behind. Not too close. He had never followed someone before. The whole thing made him feel ridiculous. Like something from a cheap detective movie, but the alternative was driving to the warehouse and pretending nothing had changed. He could not do that. The SUV turned onto the highway ramp leading toward downtown Baltimore. Daniel followed. Traffic thickened quickly. Commuters filled the lanes. Delivery vans, construction trucks, a city bus creeping along the shoulder. For a moment, Daniel worried he might lose the car, but the black SUV stayed visible ahead of him, gliding between lanes with practiced ease. Daniel kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. His mind ran through every possible explanation again. Client meetings, corporate car service, maybe Emily had been telling the truth the entire time. But that memory from earlier would not leave him. Emily leaning into the vehicle, laughing at something the man said. That laugh had not sounded like work. The highway curved toward the skyline. Tall glass buildings appeared ahead. The SUV exited toward the downtown business district. Daniel followed carefully. The streets narrowed. Morning commuters walked quickly along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and briefcases. The SUV slowed at a red light. Daniel stopped 2 cars back. Now he could see the rear window clearly. Through the tinted glass, he could just barely make out 2 shapes in the back seat. Emily on the right side, the man beside her. They were talking. The man leaned slightly toward her. Emily nodded. Then she smiled again. Daniel felt something twist deep in his stomach. The light turned green. Traffic moved forward. 2 blocks later, the SUV turned into a parking garage attached to a tall stone building. Daniel slowed as he passed the entrance. He glanced up at the sign above the driveway. Riverside Terrace Offices. The name hit him immediately. Daniel drove another half block before pulling over. He turned off the engine. For a moment, he just sat there. Riverside Terrace, the same name from the bank charge. The same restaurant receipt he had stared at yesterday afternoon. Daniel leaned back in the seat. That coincidence felt too perfect to ignore. A few minutes later, the black SUV rolled back out of the garage entrance. Empty. The driver alone in the front seat. Emily and the man were already inside the building. Daniel watched the SUV disappear down the street again. Then he looked up at the office building towering above the sidewalk. Glass windows reflected the early morning sunlight. Professional people walked through the revolving doors, carrying laptops and folders. Daniel felt suddenly out of place sitting in his old car. Warehouse boots, calloused hands. He imagined Emily stepping into that building beside the man in the suit. Two people belonging to the same world. Daniel opened the car door slowly. The city air smelled like coffee and traffic. For a moment he considered driving away, pretending he had never followed the SUV. But the receipt from the restaurant and the lie about Friday night kept pushing at him. Daniel stepped onto the sidewalk and looked at the building entrance. If he walked inside, if he saw them together, there would be no more guessing. Just the truth. Daniel crossed the street and headed toward the revolving doors. Daniel stepped through the revolving door and immediately felt out of place. The lobby smelled like polished stone and fresh coffee. The floor reflected the morning light coming through the tall glass windows. Men in suits crossed the room quickly while checking their phones. A woman at the reception desk greeted someone by name. Nobody looked at Daniel directly, but he still felt like they could all see the difference. His worn boots, the faded hoodie, the nervous way he paused just inside the entrance. Daniel scanned the lobby. 3 elevator banks stood along the far wall. A digital board listed the businesses inside the building. Law firms, consulting groups, financial services. Then he saw the name. Hale Consulting Group. Daniel felt the words settle heavily in his chest. Hale. Jonathan Hale. The name Emily had mentioned in the kitchen. Daniel stared at the directory for a long moment. Floor 23. His eyes moved toward the elevators. Several people were waiting. None of them looked like warehouse workers who had skipped a shift to follow their wife into a corporate office tower. Daniel stepped toward the elevators anyway. A man in a dark suit glanced briefly at him, then back to his phone. The elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped inside with the others. Nobody spoke. The numbers climbed slowly. 10. 14. 17. Daniel watched his reflection in the polished metal wall. He looked tired, older than he remembered feeling. When the doors opened at floor 23, most of the passengers stepped out. Daniel followed them. The hallway was quiet. Soft carpet underfoot. Glass office walls. A large sign at the end of the corridor read Hale Consulting Group. Daniel slowed as he approached the reception desk. Behind it sat a young woman typing quickly on a computer. She looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning." Daniel opened his mouth. But nothing came out at first. He had not actually planned what to say. "I am looking for Emily Mercer." The receptionist checked her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" Daniel hesitated. "No." The receptionist's smile remained polite but distant. "Emily arrived a few minutes ago. She is currently in a meeting." Daniel nodded slowly. A meeting. Of course. Daniel glanced past the desk. Through the glass walls he could see several conference rooms further inside the office. People moving, talking, working. Somewhere in that office, Emily was sitting across from Jonathan Hale, the man from the SUV, the man whose name now sat on the wall of an entire consulting firm. Daniel felt the familiar tightness return to his chest. He turned back toward the receptionist. "Which room?" The receptionist frowned slightly. "Excuse me." Daniel held her gaze. "Which conference room is she in?" For a moment, the receptionist studied him more carefully. Then her eyes flicked toward the hallway behind him. Daniel noticed the change immediately. He turned. Emily stood at the end of the corridor, and Jonathan Hale was standing beside her. Emily stopped walking the moment she saw Daniel. For a second, her face went completely blank. Not anger, not fear, just the stunned expression of someone who did not expect their private life to appear in the middle of their workplace. Jonathan Hale slowed beside her. He looked from Emily to Daniel calmly, like a man studying a situation before deciding how to respond. The receptionist behind the desk straightened in her chair. Emily walked forward first. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Her voice stayed low but tight. Daniel did not answer right away. He looked around the office. Glass walls, expensive furniture, quiet conversations happening in other rooms. People in suits walking past carrying tablets and folders. Then he looked back at Emily. "You said you were going to work." Emily crossed her arms slightly. "I am at work." Daniel glanced towards Jonathan. The man stood a few feet behind her now, watching. Not embarrassed, not defensive, just waiting. Daniel felt the familiar heat crawl up the back of his neck again. "You forgot to mention the driver." Emily exhaled slowly. "Daniel, now is not the time for this." Daniel gave a short laugh. That line sounded rehearsed. Jonathan stepped forward finally, his posture relaxed but confident. "You must be Daniel." Daniel looked at him. "So, you do know who I am." Jonathan extended his hand politely. "Jonathan Hale." Daniel looked at the hand but did not shake it. The silence stretched a moment too long. Jonathan lowered his hand without reacting. Emily rubbed her temples briefly. "Daniel, you should not be here." Daniel ignored her. Instead, he asked the question that had been building in his chest since the driveway 2 mornings ago. "Why does your company send a car to pick up my wife every morning?" The office around them had grown quieter, not silent, but quieter. People noticed tension the way animals notice storms. Jonathan answered calmly. "Emily is involved in a new project with us." Daniel nodded slowly. "That explains the restaurant." Emily's head snapped up. Daniel continued. "Riverside Terrace, Friday night." Emily's face drained of color. Jonathan glanced toward her. Daniel felt something shift in the room. Emily spoke carefully. "That dinner was work-related." Daniel shrugged slightly. "Then why lie about it?" Emily did not answer. Jonathan spoke again. Emily did not lie. She simply did not explain the full situation yet. Daniel looked at him. "And what situation is that?" Jonathan paused. For the first time, his calm expression shifted slightly, like a man deciding how much truth to reveal. Emily shook her head quickly. "Jonathan," but Jonathan continued. "Emily has been discussing a potential leadership position with our firm." Daniel stared at him. "Leadership." Emily looked at the floor. Daniel spoke slowly. "You are offering my wife a new job." Jonathan nodded once. "Something like that?" Daniel felt a strange hollow feeling spread through his chest. "You needed secret car rides and hidden dinners to offer a job." Emily looked up again. It was not supposed to happen like this. Daniel studied her face. He noticed something he had not seen before. Guilt. But also something else. Excitement. And that realization hurt more than anything else in the room. Daniel spoke quietly. "Are you leaving?" Emily did not answer. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, but it told Daniel everything he needed to know. The silence in the hallway felt heavier than anything Daniel had experienced in years. Emily still had not answered the question. "Are you leaving?" People were moving through the office behind the glass walls, phones ringing, someone laughing down the corridor. Normal corporate noise continuing like nothing unusual was happening. But inside the small space near the reception desk, the air had gone tight. Emily looked at Daniel, then she looked away. Jonathan Hale watched both of them carefully. Daniel felt the answer forming even before Emily spoke. "I've not accepted anything yet." Daniel gave a quiet nod. "Not yet." The words sounded hollow. Jonathan spoke calmly. "Emily has been considering a senior leadership role with our firm." Daniel turned his eyes toward him. "Considering," Jonathan continued, "it would involve relocating." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Relocating where?" Jonathan answered without hesitation. "Chicago." The word hung in the air between them. Daniel blinked slowly. Chicago was not a short move, not a new office across town. Chicago meant another life, another city, another world. Daniel looked back at Emily. "You're going to move 800 miles away, and you thought a car showing up outside our house every morning would not raise questions." Emily rubbed her forehead. "Daniel, I was trying to figure it out first." Daniel laughed quietly. "Figure what out?" Emily's voice dropped. "If I wanted it." Daniel studied her face carefully. He had known Emily for more than a decade. He could read the smallest shift in her expression. And what he saw now was not uncertainty about the job. It was uncertainty about him. Daniel spoke slowly. "You already know you want it." Emily did not deny it. That silence said enough. Jonathan stepped slightly to the side, giving them space but remaining close enough to hear everything. Daniel turned toward him. "How long has this been happening?" Jonathan answered directly. "We started conversations about 3 months ago." Daniel felt the words hit like small stones. 3 months. He looked back at Emily. 3 months of meetings. 3 months of morning pickups. 3 months of dinners Daniel had never heard about. Emily spoke softly. "I did not want to say anything until I knew it was real." Daniel shook his head. "You mean until you knew you were leaving?" Emily's eyes filled with frustration. "It is not that simple." Daniel spread his hand slightly. "Then explain it to me." Emily looked around the office. "Not here." Daniel's voice stayed quiet but firm. "Here works fine." Jonathan glanced toward the reception desk where the young woman had suddenly become very interested in her computer screen. Emily lowered her voice. "The role is partner track." Daniel did not react immediately. Even he knew enough about corporate life to understand what that meant. Partner track meant power, money, status. Emily continued. "They want me to lead a new operations division in Chicago." Daniel felt something strange move through his chest. Part pride, part pain. That is a big step. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes." Daniel looked at Jonathan again. "So, you send a car to pick her up?" Jonathan answered simply. "We wanted to make the transition easier." Daniel almost smiled at the word transition. That word sounded too clean for what was actually happening. He turned back to Emily. "When were you planning to tell me?" Emily hesitated. "Soon." Daniel's laugh came out rough. "Soon." He gestured toward the street outside the building. "Your neighbors already knew about the car." Emily froze. Daniel continued. "Greg asked me about it yesterday morning." Emily's face tightened with embarrassment. Daniel felt the humiliation rise again. The entire neighborhood had been watching the same scene every day, everyone except the husband. Emily spoke quietly. "I did not think anyone noticed." Daniel nodded once. That sentence hurt more than anything else she had said. He looked at her carefully. For the first time since walking into the building, Daniel asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Is there something between you and him?" Emily looked shocked. "What?" Daniel gestured slightly toward Jonathan. "You spend mornings in his car, you have private dinners. You're planning a new life 800 miles away." Emily's voice came out sharp. "There's nothing like that." Jonathan spoke calmly beside her. "Daniel, I assure you, this is strictly professional." Daniel studied both of their faces. Jonathan looked composed. Emily looked angry, but also tired. Daniel finally nodded. Okay, he believed them. Or at least he believed that was not the real issue, because the real problem had just become painfully clear. It was not an affair. It was something worse. Emily had already started building a life that did not include him, and she had done it quietly, right in front of their house, every morning at 6:43. Daniel did not leave right away. After the conversation ended, Jonathan excused himself with a polite nod and disappeared down the hallway. He said something about another meeting, the kind of quiet corporate exit that left the emotional mess behind for other people to deal with. Now, it was just Daniel and Emily standing near the glass wall overlooking the city. The morning sun had climbed higher. Traffic moved slowly along the streets below, tiny cars and buses weaving through downtown Baltimore. Daniel leaned lightly against the window. Emily stood a few feet away. Neither of them spoke for almost a minute. 12 years of marriage had suddenly shrunk into a strange, quiet moment in a corporate office hallway. Daniel finally broke the silence. 3 months. Emily looked down at the floor. Yes. Daniel nodded slowly. 3 months of this. Emily did not argue. Daniel let out a long breath. I keep trying to remember when it started. Emily glanced at him. What do you mean? Daniel looked out at the city again. When you stopped telling me things. Emily crossed her arms tightly. That is not fair. Daniel turned toward her. Is it not? Emily's voice rose slightly. I was trying to make a decision that affects both of us. Daniel gave a small shrug. Except I did not know about it. Emily rubbed her forehead again. Daniel, I did not want to start a fight before I even knew if the job would happen. Daniel looked at her carefully. You thought I would fight you about it? Emily hesitated. Then she said quietly, Yes. Daniel absorbed that for a moment. The answer hurt more than he expected. You thought I would try to stop you. Emily's voice stayed low. You love this place. Daniel glanced toward the street below, the small houses, the quiet neighborhood, the warehouse job he had been doing for almost a decade. Emily continued, Your parents are here. Your friends are here. Your whole life is here. Daniel nodded once. That was true. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind since Jonathan mentioned Chicago. Did you ever imagine us going together? Emily did not answer immediately. Daniel waited. Finally, she spoke. I did. Daniel felt a brief flicker of relief, until she continued. At first. Daniel looked at her again. At first. Emily exhaled slowly, but then I realized something. Daniel said nothing. Emily looked him directly in the eyes. You would hate it. Daniel frowned. You do not know that. Emily shook her head slightly. Daniel, you have never even wanted to leave this county. Daniel crossed his arms. That does not mean I would not try. Emily's expression softened, but the softness carried sadness. You would be miserable. Daniel felt frustration rise. You decided that for me. Emily spoke carefully. I know you. Daniel shook his head. No, you decided who I was going to be. The words hung heavily in the space between them. Emily looked away. Daniel continued quietly. You started building a new life 3 months ago. Emily swallowed. I was exploring an opportunity. Daniel almost laughed again. You had a driver picking you up from our house every morning. Emily said nothing. Daniel took a few steps toward the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Warehouse hoodie, rough hands. Standing inside a building where people probably made his yearly salary in a few months. He understood the gap now, the difference between his world and Emily's. Emily had been moving toward this life long before the SUV appeared. The car was just the part he finally noticed. Daniel spoke without turning around. "Did you ever plan to tell me before you accepted it?" Emily answered honestly, "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "When?" Emily hesitated. "Soon." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That word again, soon. He turned back toward her. "You know what the worst part is." Emily looked at him carefully. "What?" Daniel's voice stayed calm. "It is not a job. It is not Chicago." Emily waited. Daniel continued. "It is realizing the entire neighborhood knew something about my marriage before I did." Emily's face tightened with embarrassment. Daniel could see the guilt now. Real guilt. But it was too late for that to fix anything. Daniel stepped away from the window. For the first time since walking into the building, he felt strangely calm, a kind of quiet clarity settling into his mind. He looked at Emily. "So what happens now?" Emily's voice came out softer than before. "I have not accepted the position yet." Daniel nodded. "But you are going to." Emily did not answer. She did not have to. Daniel studied her face one last time. 12 years of memories sitting behind those eyes. Road trips, late-night conversations, small fights over stupid things. And now, this moment. Daniel finally spoke. "If you want the job, take it." Emily blinked. "What?" Daniel's voice stayed steady. "Take it." Emily stared at him. "You cannot be serious." Daniel shrugged slightly. "Why not?" Emily's eyes filled with confusion. "Daniel, this is our life." Daniel gave a small tired smile. "That is the problem." Emily waited for him to explain. Daniel looked around the office one more time. Then he said quietly, "I think you already started living a different one." Emily stared at Daniel like she had not heard him correctly. "Take it." The words hung between them in the quiet hallway. Daniel could see the confusion on her face, not relief, not gratitude, just disbelief. "You cannot mean that." Daniel leaned against the glass wall again, looking down at the traffic below. "Why not?" Emily stepped closer. "Because this affects both of us." Daniel nodded slowly. "Exactly." Emily searched his face, trying to understand what had changed. 10 minutes earlier, he had walked into the building angry and humiliated. Now his voice sounded calm. Too calm. Daniel finally looked at her. "Let me ask you something." Emily waited. "When Jonathan offered you this job 3 months ago, did you come home and tell me that night?" Emily shook her head. "No." Daniel continued. "Did you tell me the next week?" "No." "Did you tell me when the car started picking you up in the morning?" Emily swallowed. "No." Daniel spread his hands slightly. "Then it stopped being both of us a long time ago." Emily's expression tightened. "That is not fair." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You said that earlier, too." Emily ran a hand through her hair. "Daniel, I was trying to figure out what I wanted." Daniel nodded. "And you did." Emily did not answer. Daniel continued. "You want this job." Emily finally spoke. "Yes." The word came out quietly but firmly. Daniel studied her. There it was. The honesty that had been missing for 3 months. He felt a strange mix of pride and sadness at the same time. It is a big opportunity. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes." Daniel asked another question. "If I had never seen the SUV, if Greg had never said anything, how long would you have kept this going?" Emily hesitated. Daniel waited. Finally she spoke. "Until I knew for sure." Daniel nodded. "Until you knew if you were leaving." Emily rubbed her face. "You keep saying that like I already made the decision." Daniel shrugged. "You have." Emily looked frustrated. "I've not signed anything." Daniel looked toward the hallway where Jonathan had disappeared earlier. "You do not need to sign something to decide." Emily's shoulders sagged slightly. For a moment she looked exhausted. Daniel recognized that look. It was the same one she had when she worked late nights preparing presentations or solving problems for clients. Ambition, pressure, determination. Emily spoke quietly. "I worked 10 years to reach this point." Daniel nodded. "I know." Emily looked surprised by the calmness in his voice. Daniel continued, "I watched you do it. Late nights, weekend projects, studying for certifications." Emily's eyes softened slightly. Then she asked, "So, why does it feel like you are pushing me away?" Daniel thought about that question carefully. "Because I am not." Emily frowned. "It sounds like it." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. What I am doing is refusing to pretend this is still the same life." Emily did not understand. Daniel explained. 3 months ago you started walking in a different direction." Emily opened her mouth to argue but stopped. Daniel gestured toward the elevators. "You have a driver." Private meetings. Dinner with the CEO of the company. Emily looked embarrassed again. Daniel continued, "That is not the life we built together." Emily spoke carefully. "It could be." Daniel smiled faintly. "Could it?" Emily hesitated. Daniel pressed gently. "Be honest. If we moved to Chicago, if I left my job, if we started over there, would you still respect me?" Emily blinked. "What kind of question is that?" Daniel's voice stayed calm. "An honest one." Emily shook her head. "Of course I would." Daniel held her gaze. "But would you look at me the same way?" Emily did not answer. Daniel saw the hesitation, and that hesitation confirmed everything he'd been feeling since yesterday morning. He spoke softly. "That is what I thought." Emily stepped closer again. "Daniel, you are twisting this." Daniel shook his head. "No, I'm finally seeing it clearly." Emily waited. Daniel continued, "You do not want to leave me. You just do not want to stay the same." Emily's eyes widened slightly. Daniel went on, "And the truth is, you cannot have both." The words settled between them heavily. Emily looked down. For the first time since he walked into the building, she seemed unsure again. Daniel felt the quiet weight of the moment. Then he said the thing he had been thinking since the SUV drove away that morning. "Take the job." Emily looked up slowly. Daniel continued, "Move to Chicago, build the life you want." Emily stared at him. "What about us?" Daniel paused. Then he answered honestly, "I do not know." That was the first completely truthful sentence either of them had spoken all morning. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked away toward the window again. The city traffic kept moving below them. People going to work, starting their day, normal life continuing. Daniel realized something in that moment. The black SUV outside his house had not destroyed his marriage. It had simply revealed how far apart they'd already drifted. And once you saw that distance, you could not pretend it was not there anymore. The black SUV returned to Daniel Mercer's street on a quiet Saturday morning. Not because of Emily, because the house was being shown to a buyer. Daniel stood in the kitchen while a real estate agent walked a young couple through the living room. Their voices drifted through the hallway as they talked about paint colors and natural light. The place looked smaller now that most of the furniture was gone. Daniel leaned against the same counter where he had been standing the morning the SUV first appeared. 6 months. The time had moved faster than he expected. Emily had left 3 weeks after that morning in the office. The final decision had happened quietly. No dramatic fight, no slammed doors. Just a conversation at the kitchen table late at night after several days of careful silence. Emily accepted the Chicago position. Daniel had helped her pack. That part still surprised him when he thought about it. At the time, the neighbors probably assumed something terrible had happened between them. But the truth was stranger. The moment the truth came out in that office building, something inside Daniel had changed. The humiliation disappeared. In its place came something colder. Clarity. He had spent years thinking their marriage was a shared road, but Emily had already turned onto another one long before the SUV arrived. And once Daniel saw that, the anger stopped making sense. Emily visited the house one last time before leaving. She stood in the living room holding her suitcase while Daniel leaned against the doorway. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, but they both understood it was already over. Emily spoke first. "I thought you would hate me." Daniel shook his head. "No." Emily waited for more. Daniel continued, "I was angry for about 24 hours. Emily blinked. "Only 24. Daniel gave a small shrug. Then I realized something. Emily watched him carefully. "What?" Daniel looked around the room. The same walls. The same couch. The same quiet street outside. I think we were both already leaving. Emily frowned slightly. "I was the only one moving to another city." Daniel nodded. "True, but you started moving first." Emily did not argue, because she knew he was right. Daniel continued. "The car outside the house was not the beginning. It was just the first thing I noticed." Emily's eyes softened. Daniel gave a faint smile. "You had been building that new life for a while." Emily asked quietly, "Do you regret letting me go?" Daniel thought about the question carefully. Then he answered honestly, "No." Emily seemed surprised. Daniel explained, "If I'd begged you to stay, you would have stayed." Emily nodded slowly. "That was true." Daniel continued, "And you would have resented me for the rest of your life." Emily looked down at the floor. Daniel finished the sentence. "And eventually you would have left anyway." The silence between them felt heavy but peaceful. Emily picked up her suitcase. "Chicago is a big city," Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Emily hesitated before walking to the door. "Daniel." He looked up. "I did love you." Daniel smiled slightly. "I know." Emily stepped outside. That was the last time Daniel saw her in person. The house sold 2 months later. Daniel moved into a smaller apartment across town. He kept the same job at the warehouse. For a while, people expected him to fall apart. Greg across the street even asked him one morning if he was doing okay. Daniel told him the truth. Better than expected. And that answer surprised Daniel as much as it surprised Greg, because something strange had happened after Emily left. The quiet humiliation that once sat in his chest disappeared. In its place was something new. A sense that his life had finally become his again. Not smaller, just clearer. On the Saturday, the buyers toured the house. Daniel walked through each empty room slowly. The bedroom, the kitchen, the living room where they had watched movies for years. Every memory still existed, but none of it felt like a wound anymore. The real estate agent returned from the front door. "They seem very interested." Daniel nodded. "Good." He stepped outside onto the porch. The same quiet suburban street stretched in both directions. A kid rode a bicycle down the sidewalk. Someone watered their lawn across the street. Normal life. Daniel walked to the curb. For a moment, he looked at the exact spot where the black SUV had parked 6 months earlier. At the time, it had felt like the beginning of the worst moment of his life. Now it felt different. The car had not taken anything away from him. It had simply revealed the truth earlier than he might have discovered it on his own. Daniel slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. Sometimes people think the worst thing that can happen in a marriage is betrayal, But Daniel had learned something else. The real danger is when two people slowly start living different lives without noticing, because by the time you finally see it, one of them may already be gone. Daniel turned and walked back toward the house one last time, and for the first time since the black SUV appeared, he felt completely calm. If this story made you pause for a moment, you are not alone, because situations like this happen more often than people admit. Sometimes a marriage does not end with betrayal. Sometimes it ends quietly when two people slowly begin living different lives. Daniel only realized it the morning a black SUV appeared outside his house. The real question is this: if you were in Daniel's position and you discovered your partner had been planning a completely different future, would you fight to keep them, or would you let them go? Tell us what you would do. Your perspective might help someone else watching this video right now. And if you enjoy realistic life stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because every week we share stories about real choices, real consequences, and the moments that change people's lives forever. This is Final Text, where every story begins with a small moment and ends with the truth people did not expect.